Yeah, we're not doing that. We are not doing that. It's okay, I'll be the tank now. Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. And this time is once again a live stream highlights edition. And strangely, despite having a little squad at my house trying to snipe me once again, I don't think they succeeded even once. We also had an interesting variety of duties, although also a high concentration of guild tests. Anyway, for duty 1, we went as Bard to good King Moggle Mog Extreme, praise be his fluffiness, as a 12-minute replacement. Now, armed with the fact that the party at the very least knew not to destroy the Mog's Guard immediately, and the tanks knew they needed to split up the tank Mog's Guard, we went for it. For my part, I mainly just used Heavy Shot and Bloodletter to carefully whittle down the Mog's Guards. As long as everyone does this carefully, there's very little that can outright wipe the party, but there are some things. The first thing is that depending on where the Black Mage starts casting its flare, you may not be able to just step out of the way, and if that is the case, you have to hit it a few times to stop it. If the Black Mage is too low HP, it can force you to lose out on damage on the other Mog's Guard. Similarly, a specific Mog's Guard combo called Moogle Go Round requires the White Mage Moogle to be hit a few times in the same way, and that one typically wipes you if it goes through. There's also a Mog's Guard combo where 3 players get crowd controlled and need Ishuna to escape before they get one-shotted. Additionally, the King will every so often buff nearby Mog's Guards, and certain Mog's Guards can be a huge problem if they get buffed too much. For example, the Ranger will sometimes just hit a few players, and if it is buffed too much, they just die. The way you work around that is by moving the King away when specific Mogs come close to him. The fact the King does this is also why a tank switch is necessary every so often. You move the King. Throughout our clear here, a healer got killed by, I believe, avoidable damage. Later, a tank died quite suddenly, which I'm guessing was due to a lack of tank switching. And near the very end, 3 players die out of nowhere to the Ranger shooting them. Despite these random mess-ups, we still cleared in the first try, since I joined. Well done, team! For duty 2, we went to Porta Decumana as a Dark Knight. There's not very much to talk about here, since the entire party seemed to play very well and efficiently. I guess the key high point to talk about is the fact that the fight does raid-wide damage rarely enough that healers can be quite greedy with their healing without getting punished. Just keep track of which attacks does how much damage, and how much HP players need so you can optimize your AoE heals. For tanks, cycling your defensive cooldowns to reduce auto-attack damage can help the healer greed even harder, but as long as you have defensives for tank busters, you're good. For DPS, remember that you can use the LB1 that is generated through phase 2 before the LB3 is granted to double up on limit breaks. For duty 3, we went to Swarm of Healers as Black Mage. A mildly funny situation we ran into here is that since Black Mage's AoE at this level range isn't that impressive and the Pugilist had nothing, we ended up having to single target most of the healers down to push through the boss at the end. For duty 4, we went to Button Mash Central as Pictomancer. No, seriously, unless you plan to use Tempera Coat for something here, the only thing you can do is press fire in red and arrow in green. The best optimization you can make is to get into melee range for auto attacks, and to prioritize the big guy a bit. For duty 5, we went as an instant replacement to World of Darkness as Warrior. I seem to recall several people in the duty knew me, so hello to you all. I recall specifically Edward the Scholar also came to the stream later. On the first boss, the Dark Knight Sprout tank, although unlikely to be a first time as a Dark Knight here, seemed to really enjoy dragging the boss in circles when they had aggro. I put up with this for about 15 seconds before I decided to take the reins. On the Dragon boss, I gave them one more chance to get it right, but since they immediately started doing it wrong again, I took away their main tanking privilege for the rest of the duty. Except on the final boss, since they can't mess our positioning up anyway. If you've had to deal with wacky code tanks in the past, here's a tip on how to forcibly take over. First, use Provoke, and then spam your ranged enmity attack. At really high levels, other attacks may help too. Until your Provoke is ready again. If you can maintain aggro lead until Provoke is ready again, the problem tank has to spam their ranged attack or use Provoke to take over again. And if you simply Provoke right after them, their only option is range spam, which is not super fun, so they are unlikely to do that. However, if you observe ranged spam, you can simply range spam in return. This trick is particularly effective on Warrior, as their ranged attack does considerably more enmity potency than the other tank's ranged attacks, in total. Now, on the Atomos section of the duty, I even swapped to tank for Alliance B because I saw the Dark Knight on my Alliance's platform. No problem, we simply swap and it works out. To be clear, I have no problems with Sprout tanks needing to learn how it's done, but we can probably both agree that running in circles with bosses is not it, and by the time you reach World of Darkness, regardless of what role you normally play, you should know that. Now, despite this confusion, we managed to get through the duty with minor hiccups. For duty 6, we went to Garuda hard as Samurai. I guess you might want to be sure you maintain Higanbana on Garuda. If you can, a tank Haukke when the feathers spawn could also be pretty solid. But aside from that, not that much you can do aside from maintaining uptime on Garuda. Near the end of the fight, we had a moment where Garuda was tanked where she actively stood in the center tornado spot, meaning all the melee players were forced to stand in front of her, leading to a very painful cleave attack. But of course, we managed. For duty 7, we went to Sirensong Sea as Gunbreaker. Overall, the duty went just fine. However, there were a few things standing out about our team. First, our healers seemed to sometimes resort to stone during AoE pulls. I can see why if you're afraid of being hit by AoEs, but overall it is probably better to spend that time just finding the spot to holy and then go for it. Another thing is that it seemed like they never used regen throughout the duty, and I don't think I saw Flatus Solace either. They also made some use of Cure 1. So the thing is, they were attacking, which is good, so the main problem was that they were not very efficient about their healing, which made things way scarier for them. And me. But we still managed. As I've said before, if they are attacking, then the foundation is there and things will improve. The other standout thing is that the ninja used Doton a lot on single target. This is a common mistake I've mentioned before, and it is very, very possible they also made other mistakes that are just less obvious. Now, the reason why single target Doton is a mistake is that, even at this level, Doton does a grand total of 560 potency, 1 hit up front, then 6 ticks, while Raiton does 650. There just isn't any reason to use Doton in a duty like this on single target. An additional little extra detail is that placed AoEs, like Doton, snapshots your state when placed, like rate buffs, but scales real time with the target, so debuffs like Trick Attack only covers the parts of Doton it is active for, so it does not work well with burst windows. Anyway, aside from that, the duty went well. By the way, did you know that Warrior can solo Sirensong Sea synced? For duty 8, we went to Haukke Manor as White Mage. For this one, I was quite focused on the tank, who was doing quite well, although there were a few things that could be even better. First of all, they were frequently making use of arm's length as a defensive cooldown, which many tanks forget to do entirely. They also made plenty of use of Rampart, of course, and even tried to interrupt and stun mobs and bosses. However, they did not use sprint even once in the entire duty. This is not a negative because mer speedrun, but rather because sprinting outruns the mobs while you pull them, which allows you to take less damage while you are rounding up mobs. Another minor issue that came up was that they attempted to interrupt the AoE on the first boss, but did not make sure to start running away in case it didn't work, and just got stunned. My advice, if you're attempting to prevent a boss from doing something, is to start running away as if it won't work if you don't know for certain that it does work. Sure, that might cost you some value if it happens to work out, but you will know that for next time. A plus on the other end is that I didn't even know that the first boss could be slowed by arm's length, which I learned here. Just to be clear, despite having these specific mistakes to point out, the duty went very well. For duty 9, we went to Void Ark as a 2-minute replacement Sage. aside from us being able to cheer on the raid for the first boss, not that much interesting happens overall. I guess something worth mentioning is how the final boss has a rather ominous looking stack marker with this shaded look. This tends to scare away first-timers as it looks like some sort of bad mechanic overlapping with the stack marker. Don't worry, it is just a weird stack marker. A random detail from this run specifically is that this was the one where I finally got the minion from Void Ark. You might think that's oddly late, but the minion from this duty is 1 per whole Alliance raid, meaning 1 minion to share between 24 players. The fact Void Ark does not come up very often doesn't help either, although from what I could see in the chat log, there was like 2 or 3 other players needing it aside from me, so I guess this particular minion is closing in on fully saturating the demand. For duty 10, we went to Praetorium as Ninja, as an instant replacement. Normally, I tend to have a lot of trouble with making sure my cooldowns don't drift apart a lot in dungeons as Ninja. However, since Praetorium precedes every boss with a 2+ minute cutscene, that hardly matters here. For my own mistakes, there was one point where I found myself using Houton, which was like me getting stuck in not remembering how to open and then rewinding, I guess, to Endwalker, where you might want to set up Houton. An extra little anecdote is that I tend to always dodge the mechanics, despite them not doing very much damage. Part of the reason for this is that if your healer is especially a white mage, then taking a lot of damage can cause the healer GCDs, and while it is just a healer's GCD, they do quite respectable filler damage, likely more than you lose from dodging. However, as a melee DPS especially, you can just use your own healing options to save them that trouble. So in hindsight, I had very little reason to dodge much. For duty 11, we went to Labyrinth of the Ancients as an instant Reaper replacement. Funny how the Alliance raids are almost always replacements. Personally, I wasn't too focused on optimizing my damage in this run. However, if you are interested in how to optimize your damage as Reaper at level 50, obviously make sure to maintain Death's Design. Then, only spend gauge if you're going to overcap or if you have a raid buff. If your gauge is full and Death's Design is below 30 seconds of duration, and the target will live longer than 30 seconds, and you're not benefiting from a raid buff, this is the time to extend Death's Design. Of course, this whole stockpiling thing flies out the window if there are no raid buffs in your party. But in this case, we had an Astrologian for cards and divination. Probably not surprising, we managed to even skip the second flare on the final boss. For duty 12, we went to Under the Shoe as Dragoon. I guess make sure you're on top of your 1-2s. Do use sprint to save a little bit of running? Use Life Surge and Vorpal Thrust, but keep in mind, the fight is unlikely to take 40 seconds, so you only get 1 Life Surge. For duty 13, we went to Under the Boot as Astrologian, strangely. Here, I guess all you can do is set up Combust and then spam Malefic. That's all really, not even a card to use. And finally for duty 14, we were a 10-minute replacement on Rubicante as Monk. A really funny thing that came up during this fight was the fact that the spinny circle mechanic turned out to have exactly the same solution every time. I can't actually remember if it can have other solutions off the top of my head, but every time it came up, simply standing on the line before it spins turned out to be the right answer. Which looks really funny when the mechanic comes up in this way like 4 times, and every time the answer is that's right, it goes in the square hole. Since this fight is also level 90, the optimal opener should be double solar here. I just simply didn't have the focus to do exactly that in this duty. And even if I did, I ended up sitting on my cooldowns waiting for the cutscene that happens for way too long, which caused my burst to drift away from the 2-minute burst, since others didn't wait. Overall, the run went great of course, so I really wonder what happened that caused me to be a 10-minute replacement. The thing that was taking my focus, making me forget to double solar in the opener, was the conversation in the stream. We were talking about a few things, but notably the fact that the human brain can make up false memories if it helps the narrative it is trying to accomplish. A relevant example of this is how many players believe all or most mentors they meet suck way more than the average player. Sure, yes, There probably exist players for which this is actually true, but it should be exceedingly rare, all things considered. Let's be real here. However, the funny thing is, when presented with the fact that the brain can make up memories like this, the exaggerated for comedic effect response often actually becomes something like, "That may apply to some people, but not me, for my mind is infallible. My mom said I'm special." Just remember, the brain is a problem solver, not a perfect memory bank. Anyway, quite a varied set, but I am particularly impressed we managed to get Thornmarch Extreme down in one pull, well, once I arrived at least. I have been wondering if it makes more sense to finish the regular wheel of jobs fully, or just move over to doing random jobs for every duty, regardless of whether it is a stream or non-stream Mentor Roulette set. What do you think? Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, the roll action Bloodbath, importantly, only heals based on physical damage done. This means, aside from Fuma Shuriken, ninjas' jutsus don't work with it. Phantom Kamaitachi and their Ninki Spenders also won't work. Similarly, Reaper's Communio, Gluttony, Sacrificium, Harvest Moon, and Harp won't heal from Bloodbath either.